Well, hello. It's President Wilson again, back with this video. It's Thursday evening, December 10th, and it's been a while. But it's been a while because I wanted to make sure that when I came back that I did have an important message to communicate to you. And I think today there's some exciting news, and it's important. The FDA panel, advisory panel, did recommend today that one of the vaccines that's out there right now, the Pfizer one, get emergency use approval. That's a historic day for us. Now, I'm also somewhat concerned though, because there are reports that a lot of people don't want to get it. In fact, there was a survey that I just saw just today, in fact, that about half of the people in this country are saying that they are not sure they're going to get it or they are not going to get it. And among African Americans, it's even worse. 75% are saying that they're not going to get it or they're not sure they're going to get it. That's somewhat dismaying to me, and I thought that I should come on and talk to you about that. You know, certainly I understand some of the hesitancy. You know, let's talk about it. You know, first of all, this vaccine was approved in record fashion. But it's really important to know that from start to finish, it was not an 8 or 9 month process. It was many, many years of foundational work that went into this. For example, you know, both the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine are based on messenger RNA technology. Well, it was years of work, particularly by Caitlin Carrico and Drew Weissman, that laid the foundation for messenger RNA being able to be used in disease. It took many, many years. And just think also about the fact that the NIAID, that's the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Disease, that's the institute at the NIH that Tony Fauci heads. I think it was Bill Clinton, if I remember right, established NIH Vaccine Research Center. So that was a long time ago, and a lot of foundational research has been going on since that time. First focused more on HIV, but then on a number of other diseases. And one of the things that you might not know, but RSV, which is the respiratory syncytial virus, as well as MERS, the Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome, there was a lot of studies done on both of those illnesses. And in fact, a vaccine would have been available for the MERS, the Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome. That was around 2012. Would have been available, but the MERS kind of petered out. It didn't become a full-blown pandemic, and therefore pharmaceutical companies were not really interested in investing a lot of money to develop a vaccine for MERS. But the work was already put in so that the Merck vaccine would have been available if it was needed. And so all that work didn't go to waste. It was then used, all that foundational work was used to develop this vaccine. Also, just think in terms of the FDA process. I'm very familiar with it. I was on many FDA panels approving drugs and other devices. I haven't checked my CV, so I can't tell you exactly how many, but probably half a dozen or so. And I chaired some of these panels, so I understand the kind of work that goes on. It's a long process. It's a lot of data analysis, and you can feel comfortable that the people around the room that is discussing the data, that's analyzing it, are looking at it from all different angles, and they would not be recommending approval if it was not perfectly safe and was not efficacious. Now, among African Americans, there are some other considerations, obviously. You know, the whole history of research in African Americans is one that causes some legitimate concern. But I do want to, again, say a few things which hopefully will help convince you that this will be in your best interest if you are an African American to get the vaccine. First of all, very legitimately, one might wonder about whether there was good representation of African Americans in the clinical trials. And certainly the early reports were that African Americans were not being recruited into the clinical trials in sufficient numbers. And that's concerning, because if they were not in sufficient numbers, then whatever results were to come out of it may not be applicable to that population. But I was in a meeting today, and Tony Fauci, who has seen the data — I haven't seen the data, only a few people have seen the data, but assured us that there was good representation of minority and African American populations within the population that was studied. And so I feel very good about that. You should also know, I'm not sure that you know this, but the lead scientist for vaccine research at the NIH is who? Her name is Kizzy Corbett, and she is an African American woman. She's the lead scientist for vaccine research at the NIH. And then finally, although I don't know everyone that's on the FDA panel, but I do know, one of them is a colleague of mine, Hildreth, who is an African American from Meharry. So you have good representation among the patient population that was studied, and you have good representation among scientists and people approving the drug. The other thing that I just want to mention, African Americans have done a tremendous job in Michigan in reversing the racial disparity in both morbidity, that's the sickness, and mortality, the death, that we were seeing at the beginning of the pandemic. I think all of you know that even though African Americans make up only 14% of the population in Michigan, 40% of the deaths were in the African American population. Well, that has completely turned around. And so in March and April, there were 27.1 deaths among African Americans per million population. By October, November, that had gone all the way down to one death per million population. Now, any death is one too many. Nonetheless, that's remarkable to go down from 27.1 per million to just 1 per million. And why is that? Well, I think it's because, and I said this at an NIH meeting today, that people should not underestimate the motivation that African Americans have to keep themselves safe, as well as those that they love safe. And they were we were all able to be vigilant about wearing masks, social distancing, doing everything possible to make sure that we kept each other safe. And that's what's going to be necessary now with the vaccine. It's important to take the vaccine so that you are safe, but also that you keep others safe, people that you love, your friends, in your family. And I have faith that African Americans care enough about each other that they will rise to the challenge when the time comes. The next few weeks is going to be very difficult weeks for everyone. And so I'll be resuming my weekly videos because I think there's just so much to be able to talk about now. And I want to make sure that I keep repeating this message about the importance of vaccine. Okay, now, in terms of my book, the book I'm currently reading is a book called The Mountain Shadow. It's the second book. It's a sequel to Shantaram, which was one of the books that I read earlier that I mentioned to you that was set in Bombay. A person from England, I think it was, broke out of jail, went to Bombay, and it's about his life in Bombay. He became a gangster, and it was a very entertaining book. The Mountain Shadow is probably not as good as Shantaram. It's long. I don't think the plot is as tight, but it's still enjoyable reading. It's a little bit more flowery language than in the first book, but I do think it's still a very enjoyable reading. I'm likely not going to do any more book reviews, and it's because I have very exciting news. And I was motivated actually by the one of the last books that I wrote, that I read, Pachinko, which I mentioned to you if you heard that review. And I mentioned that it reminded me of my childhood in Japan when I used to go to the pachinko parlors. Well, that made me start thinking about my childhood a little bit. And I've decided that instead of reading these books every week and reporting to you on them, that I'm actually going to write my own book. And so I'm going to get started. It'll probably take, 6, 7, 8 months to complete. But I'll be doing them mainly on the weekends, and I'm actually very excited about that. I think Jacqueline wants to ask me some questions about the coronavirus and about the vaccine. So I will change things up a little bit, and I'll answer some questions, and then we'll conclude.
Okay, thank you. President Wilson, will you get the vaccine?
The question was, will I get the vaccine? And I will say absolutely, yes.
Okay, thank you. Question number 2. How can African Americans and people of color feel comfortable getting this vaccine?
Well, I think I mentioned it already, that the main thing is whether or not in the clinical trials African Americans were represented in the clinical trials, and they were. And it happens that the efficacy and the side effects in the African American population was exactly the same as in the majority population. So there was no differential effect of race in terms of the outcomes of the vaccine. And as I mentioned, it's been a long time since some of the research studies that people think about, the Tuskegee study and so forth. And I think maybe, as horrific as they were, I think that people have learned from that, and processes have changed, and I just feel very comfortable that the research that goes on now is with those ethical considerations in mind, and we have many more African Americans that's involved in the development of the science and in the evaluation of the science than in the past.
Okay, thank you. Last question. President Wilson, will you make it mandatory for the Wayne State community, meaning students, faculty, and staff, to get vaccinated before returning back to work and school?
No, we're not going to make the vaccine mandatory, but I do want to strongly recommend the university community to take the vaccine when it becomes available. At least 70% of the population really needs to be vaccinated in order to get herd immunity. And if we go through all this trouble and we don't get enough people vaccinated, that would just be a real shame and an opportunity lost. There will be other pandemics, there will be other viruses, and we've got to attack this one very vigorously, be vaccinated, and be prepared for other viruses that may come down the line in another decade or so. So with that, I want to again thank you for listening. I will be back, and I kind of miss doing this to a certain extent, so I look forward to seeing you again next week.